Great, so welcome everyone to the final webinar of our Autumn 2020 series and kind of the second of our Challenges and Conversations style webinars. It's great to see so many of you logging on and trying to come to this session to learn about this amazing challenge that we have for you. So my name is Christina Kim and I'm a program assistant with Students as Change Agents. I'll be the one kind of moderating this webinar with help from my colleagues Al and Vanessa. So as you just saw, the session is being recorded for both informational and then promotional purposes, and it's going to be on our YouTube channel, Students as Change Agents. We have our other two webinars from this series as well, the kind of welcome event that kind of just gave an overview about what our program is about, as well as our Challenges in Conversation with Scottish Music Industry Association, which kind of talked about the challenge that they have coming up in the spring. So I'm really excited to be joined by all of our excellent speakers. Thank you so much for your willingness to participate and join us today. And I hope that everyone tuning in will find it to be a really interesting hour or so. So the challenge that we have today comes from our new external partner, the Scottish Refugee Council, which is an independent charity dedicated to supporting people in need of refugee protection through a combination of direct services and policy advocacy. So the challenge question that they're going to be asking is, how can we build a fair and welcoming Scotland for refugees and asylum seekers? So that's kind of the challenge question that all the speakers today will be kind of reflecting on and addressing. And then hopefully you'll have a chance to ask some questions to them afterwards. If you'd like to ask a question, kind of after all the speakers are done, just use kind of the reaction buttons. I think you can use like a thumbs up or clap, or even just turn on your mic and say, hi, I have a question. If you're not comfortable with that, you can also put it in the chat box. That's fine as well. But it'd be great to see some of you if you want to turn on your cameras and ask the question. That would be wonderful as well. So this autumn webinar series is really just to kind of get everyone excited for our 10-week challenge program coming up in the spring, beginning in February. And the applications for that are actually going to be launching at the end of this week. It'll be available on My Career Hub. And we'll have right now we have your email addresses from you signing up to this webinar, so we can also send that link to the application to you directly. But yeah, you can always find it on My Career Hub as well. So enough of me kind of like chatting about boring logistical things. I'm just going to start by introducing the amazing speakers that we have today, kind of just in the running order of kind of how they'll be presenting. So I'm just going to start with we have from Scottish Refugee Council, we have Ruby Kelly and Robyn Moffat-Wall. So Ruby is the Corporate and Community Fundraising Officer at Scottish Refugee Council, and she won't necessarily be presenting today, but she was really helpful in kind of facilitating our partnership, and it's kind of great to have her on board. And then Robyn will be speaking today on behalf of Scottish Refugee Council. She's the Refugee Integration Advisor at SRC, and in this role she kind of provides advice, support, guidance to newly granted refugees and kind of supporting their transition from asylum seeker to recognized refugees. We're also joined by Shakya Seresinghe, who is a University of Edinburgh sanctuary scholar. She's in her third year of studying sustainable development and has lived experience kind of with asylum seeking as her family moved from Sri Lanka to the United Kingdom. So hopefully we'll be able to hear a bit about that in her presentation. Next, we have Nadin Akta, who is the Outreach and Projects Coordinator at the University of Edinburgh's Alwaleed Center for Study of Islam in the Contemporary World. In this role, she leads the Syrian Futures Project that helps Syrian refugees access higher education and employment. And then finally, we have Dr. Emma Hill, who is a postdoctoral research fellow for the University of Edinburgh's GLIMER project, which focuses on governance and local integration of migrants and Europe's refugees. And Dr. Hill, she earned her PhD in cultural research from Heriot Watt, where she kind of focused on Somali voices in Glasgow City and doing an ethnography of this population. And some of her current research interests include interactions of race and displaced migration in post-colonial spatial economies, integration of gender, race, and border controls in policy contexts, and decolonizing methodologies. So a really kind of exciting range of speakers, both with firsthand experience as well as academic experience and in the third sector. So I'm just going to hand it over now to Robyn to kind of get us really into this challenge. Thanks.
Hi, thanks, Christina. Nice to be here today. My name's Robyn from SRC. Just quick housekeeping. I have very crazy cats, so if you see them running around behind me or if there's lots of noise, that's what it is. It's not children, so they behave like that. So yeah, I thought I'd talk today about the role of the Scottish Refugee Council. Like you said, Christina, we do policy work, influencing national kind of Scottish and UK-wide policy, as well as work with communities in Glasgow and the wider areas in Scotland. And then we also have direct services for asylum seekers and refugees. There's a few different projects, and I focus specifically with newly granted refugees. What that means is when someone's granted leave to remain on asylum grounds, so that can be they've made an asylum claim and been granted refugee status, humanitarian protection, or discretionary leave, it means they're allowed to remain in the UK for their protection. And when you get this status, it's a very happy time for people. And I always say congratulations in the first instance, because it is something that a lot of people try and achieve for a long time. And it's a big relief. But it's also a point of serious transition, because while someone is an asylum seeker, they don't have as many rights as we think they should. They don't have the right to work, typically. They'll have some right to study. You are not able to claim benefits or anything like that. And if you're awarded support from the Home Office, you're given £37 a day, just over £37, sorry, a week. So it's £5-ish a day per person in your household. And that's on a little credit card issued by the Home Office. So it's a very constricted way of living. It can be difficult for people to transition from being an asylum seeker and having limited rights and uncertain immigration status in the UK to suddenly being granted status and having all these rights and suddenly responsibilities as well. Suddenly you're liable to pay your council tax. And my role is to support people through this process. It often involves becoming homeless, because people who are accommodated by the Home Office are usually, it's difficult. I'm going to be talking about usually a lot because this year is not usual. COVID has presented incredible challenges across the sectors. So not just immigration, but housing and homelessness, welfare benefits, school education, all kinds of things. So when I say usually, I mean not COVID times. So the Home Office usually evicts people from their accommodation within 28 days of being granted status. That's not a lot of time for someone who doesn't have savings or a job to find a tenancy, pay a deposit, or whatever we would usually do, someone with citizenship and the right to work. So that often means that they apply for homelessness with their local authority. So I speak from a Glasgow context because typically asylum seekers are dispersed to the Glasgow area, although we do support people across Scotland. But my work is specific with Glasgow. I'm sure other speakers are going to be touching on the wider Scotland areas later on. But for me, the context is Glasgow. So we work very closely at SRC with Glasgow City Council to facilitate homeless applications and make sure that people's housing rights and housing needs are being met. So that involves a lot of advocacy, but a lot of just helping people understand what their actual rights are. So that's, a lot of information sessions, giving people written information and advice and guidance on an ongoing basis. So we can support people for up to 12 months after a grant of status. And that's just however much or little a person needs. It's totally tailored to the family or individual's needs at the time. The other thing is financial security. So if you have been granted access to public funds, that means that you can claim benefits, you can apply for council tax reductions and access public funds in general. So usually that means facilitating applications for benefits, housing benefit, universal credit, that kind of thing, and making sure that people have the correct documentation from the Home Office. And under COVID times, that has been very difficult because all of a sudden solicitors' offices are closing, documents are getting lost, they're being delayed, and people are not able to claim their benefits on time and are facing destitution as a result. So it's something that we're having to work very closely with other organisations, including the council, the Home Office and their contractor, Migrant Help. One moment, I'm going to close the door. Sorry. So yeah, partnership working is more important now than ever. And one positive that I would say has come out of the national lockdowns is that it has forced organisations that didn't work together before to work together because there is absolutely no other choice. And while it's really dire conditions that's forced everyone's hand to work together, I think joint working is really positive. So yeah, my job is an awful lot of managing the transition, making sure people understand their rights, and with rights come responsibilities. So if you're going to claim benefits, what are the social contracts that you're entering into with the job centre, or perhaps the housing provider that you're signing a tenancy with? What is your responsibility? We also support people to access education, whether that be English language classes, informal or more formal. We have volunteers that call our clients and have kind of informal chats in English to encourage people to develop more conversational English. That's quite useful. And also just in these times where we're having very limited social connections and interactions with others, it's useful for people to be able to chat in English because there's less natural opportunity. You don't typically stop and chat with people on the street or in the shop anymore because we're all wearing masks. So it's nice to have our volunteers. We have an amazing team of volunteers that we rely on heavily. Oh, and the other thing is work. A lot of people who claim asylum in the UK have incredible careers that they've left behind. Or perhaps they're an amazing scholar, or perhaps they have a long family history in agriculture, or whatever it may be that they're skilled in. A lot of people's skills won't be recognised in the UK because they perhaps don't have the documentation to back it up, or the same, say you've got a degree from a university in, let's say, I don't know, Dubai. That's a common one that we see where people have kind of travelled across different regions to study, not always recognised at the same level in the UK. So we try and facilitate that working with partner organisations, namely the Bridges programme in Glasgow, to help people have an assessment on what their formal qualifications and education levels are in the UK. So that's really important, but a lot of people have fled horrible scenarios that we can only imagine, and they don't have their documents with them. And it really makes me sad when my clients don't have the documents they need to back it up, and perhaps it's very difficult for them to contact their university or whatever it may be, or perhaps old employer, to evidence their previous experience. So a lot of people who are qualified professionals and academics can't prove that they are, so start from the beginning. And lots of people might not have any work experience at all, and maybe don't speak English and are starting from the beginning as well. And a lot of the work we do, we have an employability team that works specifically with employers who are interested in making employment more accessible to migrants in the UK. And we do kind of end-to-end employment planning with each individual and try and pair them with employers that suits them. But a lot of the work that I do on the daily is kind of assessing, okay, what are your goals? Like I try and encourage people to think as big as they can. When you ask kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's that kind of thing. It's okay, it's absolute gold star. What do you want to do? Okay, we'll work from there, and we try and close the gaps. So whether it's, I don't know, get your qualifications matched up, or develop your English language skills. Maybe it's find a part-time job while you're studying something else. It's all that kind of planning and assessing. So really, I need to be very knowledgeable about all kinds of things. But there's an awful lot of barriers throughout the way. It's a lot of systems. Think about it as a machine with lots of different cogs. And the government has so many different branches, and they don't all talk to each other. And sometimes they work against each other a little bit. And I'm sure Emma's going to talk about that later on, about when policy and systems work against one another, and it's individuals that face those obstacles, and they can be very difficult for people to overcome. So that's part of what our support is geared towards, breaking down barriers on a case-by-case basis, and then our policy and influential team try and break down those barriers on a larger level so that individuals don't have to do it themselves. I hope that made sense. That's a good 10 minutes of me just rambling. Very open to questions when the time comes. But yeah, that's me.
Wonderful. Thanks, Robyn. Now I'll go over to Shakya.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. A bit about myself. I am from Sri Lanka. I came to the UK at the age of 12 with my parents because of my mother's work as a political journalist in Sri Lanka. I am a recipient of the Sanctuary Scholarship in our university, otherwise known as the Asylum Seeker Scholarship. And my parents were recently granted refugee status, but my case is still ongoing because I'm over 18, so I can't be a dependent of their claim. So we applied for asylum in 2015. Since then, I've been in the system. I think I've been throughout the process of seeking asylum, from, I guess, the initial stage of applying, claiming asylum, to getting rejected, also having to sort of go through a fresh claim. I've also volunteered with a lot of organizations, but my experience is mainly based in Yorkshire, not so much in Scotland, but I can imagine that it's also pretty much the same. So the stage one is when you claim asylum. Usually you have to go to Croydon to claim asylum, and that means that you can't work any longer, that if you have a passport, the Home Office take the passport from you. In that case, you have to depend on NAS support, which is like financial support given by the Home Office, but also you can apply for accommodation. And when you apply for accommodation, so you can apply, oh, did I lose connection there?
Just for a second, you're back now.
Sorry. So when you claim asylum in Croydon, you might find yourself in Liverpool, in Glasgow, in Leeds, somewhere. And for a person who's newly arrived in the UK, that can be a very daunting experience. Not for my family, because we lived in the UK before and we knew how to navigate the system. But I guess it's mainly organizations step in then to help people figure out in terms of, how do I send my kids to school, or how do I access healthcare, or, how do I get legal advice and how to move forward. And also I think building a community is very important. I've seen a lot of organizations focus on meetups, gatherings where people can get together. But it's mainly, I feel like it's mainly among refugees, but I wish there was more opportunity for refugees to interact with the rest of the community. It's very difficult to navigate. And then I think the problem, the biggest challenge of asylum seekers is when they get rejected. I think more than 50% of the cases are more likely to get rejected.
Oh, I think we've lost you there, Shakya. Maybe if you switch off your camera, it might help. If you just do audio, I don't know. we could try that. If not,
I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Where did I? Okay, so when you exhaust your appeal rights, that's when you become homeless. Your support stops, and this is where people are more likely to face exploitation, because I've seen a lot of people, they work illegally, they become homeless, they develop a lot of mental health conditions, and that is and they're always afraid of deportation, and that is a big problem. And I feel like not many organizations are there to address the problems that people face during that stage. Usually I've seen organizations. I've worked with the British Red Cross in Bradford and Leeds, and they usually focus on providing basic needs like giving food vouchers, trying to find host families for people who are homeless. But that I feel like they usually ignore like the strategic needs. I would say like mental health. And if you don't address that, people will face the effect of that for like a very long time. Some people even find it difficult to prepare a fresh claim because they're homeless, because they're dealing with depression or whatever. And then the other thing I would say is that I've seen a lot of organizations, they sort of work within this stereotype of what a refugee is, and often a desperate, vulnerable individual who's in need of help. And that is very problematic. I remember volunteering for one of the organizations in Bradford, and they were giving out food parcels for refugees. And I saw some of the fruit being rotten, and I told them that, and they were like, "Oh, beggars can't be choosy." So that kind of mindset really needs to change. So I would also say that if you're thinking of joining this program, think that you're dealing with people with variety of experiences from diverse backgrounds, and their needs can be quite different no matter which stage they're in the asylum process. For example, when I wanted to go to university, none of the organizations that I was dealing with didn't know how to go about doing it. So I had to look for information by myself. But also when I'm in university, there isn't really a system in place to help students. So even that, navigating simple things like how do I open a bank account with my identity is very difficult. So I wish there. So you really need to understand the people that you're working with to help them. And I would say finally, if you really want to build like an effective, it says my internet connection is unstable again. Anyway, so if you really want to build an effective response to deal with this issue, you also need to recognize your own reasoning behind why you want to do it. I would say that, I, as a refugee, as an asylum seeker, instead of sympathizing with my condition, I would be more happy if you could empathize with what I'm going through. Really understand where I'm coming from, what kind of needs I have, and try to address those instead of sort of putting me in a box and saying, "Oh, this is where you're at, so we're going to provide these requirements." Yeah, I hope that helps. That's all I have. Thank you.
No, that was great. Thank you so much. Now we'll pass it over to Nadin.
Hi everyone, my name is Nadin Akta. I work as an outreach and project coordinator at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm leading the Senior Futures project. I started working and supporting refugees since 2015. I come from Syria, so when the UK Scotland started to welcoming new families, I started supporting Edinburgh Council, other councils and NGOs. And it was mainly about being passionate about helping and supporting my community, and the people who are coming, all of them represented someone from my family, and all the time I thought those people coming from where I used to live. And it's really important to think about, like, when I think about the Syrian refugees, I always, like, it's really important to think it's not only the refugees come from different parts of the world, and where do you come from play a big part on the system you are going through. And even, for example, for the Syrian refugees over the last 5 years, from my experience, if you come through the UN, it's different if you come by your own. So the kind of support and the system, it's completely different. To a degree, you just feel really sad and bad sometimes. When Robyn, she was talking about people not really, or Shakya, not knowing where to do, where to go, how to do things, it's really difficult for them. And when you see other people, everything is just ready for them, like everything from scratch, their bank account, their biometric cards, and everything is well prepared for them. So it's really difficult when you compare and you see other cases. When you talk to people who are supposed to be from the same, coming from the same city or from the same route, but at the same time, there's difference in how the kind of support and welcoming they receive. Most of the people, when they arrive here, they start with the basic things, start about home, safety, warm place for them to live in. And then it starts with education, thinking about their children, about health, about linking with other community. And I felt like all the projects I worked on, it's grow because of the needs. So when we started with their need to get homes and how to get their broadband, open bank accounts, so we started to addressing the needs. But it's really sad to say that, for example, in Glasgow, it's different to Edinburgh, and then more disadvantaged people who live in small towns, so they don't get the same support, which is so difficult, for example, for me as working with the refugees or as a friend and as work, because so many of them, they contact me and say, like, we don't have this service, we don't have someone to support us in this and this. And you just feel like you can't do anything for them. You can do very, very basic help and support, but there's a really bigger picture. The other thing, I think there are so many people suffer from the stereotyping. So when you talk about refugees or asylum seekers, when you talk about Syrians, when you talk about British people or any people always have their mindset on a specific picture, and they start to copy this into all people and think, those people, they love to do this, they hate to eat that, and so on. And they always face this and different things, like when you are talking about religion, gender, education, women and men, kids, and all of these things. So it's always, and there's a space when you just start to observe this, and you can see that people are not treating each other in interaction as humans. It's more like, I'm ready for you, I know what you are, who you are, and I'm treating you depending on this, not as in regard as a person, understanding your need, understanding what you want. When I worked with the teenagers, or specifically, I felt there's a very big thing about defending where do you come from, your culture, your experience, your skills. And there's always that question of who should adapt to the new culture. Like we always, I attended so many meetings with NGOs, and they are always talking about how we can help Syrian refugees to adapt to the new culture, to the language, to the religion, and so on and so on and so on. But it's not about like people who are coming should only adapt to the new system. We should have the other way around of people understanding the culture, other people's culture, understanding their needs, understanding what they are looking for. So it's not only one way, it's like just meeting in the middle, for example, or at some point, but it's not only asking people to understand the system, adapt the language, adapt the everything different. So it's really important for people to recognize the idea of those people, and they have the freedom to practice what their traditions, what they used to celebrate and what they used to eat on a comfortable space. I worked with a teenager, and she used to eat when it's break time in a room by her own. because she said, like, I'm not comfortable sitting on the dining hall with my friends because all of them keep looking at me. And if I'm using the fork or the spoon, they ask, oh, do you use the fork and the spoon? It was like, yeah, definitely, yes, I use them. So like sometimes you come with these questions when people just embarrass her until she decided she doesn't want to sit and eat and with the rest of the group. So yeah, so there are so many difference on these things. Recently, as we talked about, like the needs are growing up and different, how they are settling down. Now the bigger questions is about education and employment. And as Shakya said, like it's not easy really to navigate the system here in the UK to understand what's available for you, where do you come from, the education system, your certificate, how it's recognized, the language thing, and all of these things. So it's always so difficult for them to decide where to go and how to go. So I'm trying to facilitate and help and support as much as I can. But again, it's really different between one university to another. Like even if I'm in Edinburgh, for example, if they are applying to this university, the kind of support, the qualifications, all of this, it's completely different. So there's not always one clear answer to everyone. You need to treat case by case. You need to go over the system again and again in each case. And with the employment, it's really the hardest ever I'm facing. Even with volunteering, if we ask organizations to get some volunteers just to help them to gain new skills or to refresh their skills, it's always like, oh wow, yes, this is great, we would like to have welcome refugees in our company and we want to do this and that with them. And once it's really, we are very close to the moment, it doesn't happen. It's all disappear. And the biggest frustration for me and for the asylum seekers or with the refugees. So it's really difficult how we can cope with this. As like Robyn said, with the COVID-19 now things are more difficult. It's so frustrating, and more questions, more uncertainty is really around. Yeah, I think that's all for me. I hope this is a bit helpful, and thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Now I'll hand it over to Emma to bring us back into a broader context. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. I'm going to just try and share my screen because I have a presentation and I'm going to fervently hope that it works. Can everybody see that?
Yep, all good.
Great. Okay, so hi everyone, my name's Emma. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow on the GLIMER project, and I'm also a board member of Maryhill Integration Network. So I work across kind of academic and third sector contexts when we're talking about asylum seekers and refugees and integration in Scotland. So what I'm going to try and do in this brief presentation is give an overview of research that I and my colleagues at the universities of Edinburgh and Glasgow and at institutions across Europe have been conducting over the last 3 years. And I'm going to try and signpost how some of our findings might begin to answer the question around which this webinar is orientated. So I work on the GLIMER project, and GLIMER is an acronym, as Christina said, I think, which stands for the Governance and Local Integration of Migrants and Europe's Refugees. And it's a collaborative project involving researchers and stakeholders from Northern and Southern Europe, as you can see on the screen here. We work across themes of accommodation provision, language education, labour market access, and gender inequality to try and trace how local communities, organisations, and local activities impact national approaches to integration and vice versa. So, over the last 3 years, we've therefore worked with stakeholders from refugee and asylum seeking backgrounds, stakeholders from third sector organisations directly involved in supporting refugees and asylum seekers, third sector and public sector organisations who provide services that refugee and asylum seekers access, and local and national government, and then also in the case of Scotland, devolved government. So in our work, we try and we ask these questions and we try and answer them. So we ask things like, what are the challenges and opportunities involved in accessing and providing support for asylum seekers and refugees? What are the obstacles or surprises that people might encounter, and what works and what doesn't? And then we try and build on this and ask, what does this tell us not only about integration policies, but also about integration governance? What are the patterns in national and local governments' approaches towards integration? And what are the potentials or problems facing community or local activists? Now, I think all of these questions are relevant to the questions posed in this seminar, because they're aimed at interrogating infrastructures of power, of participation and representation, and they help make visible within integration registers who has power to affect change, who has a chance to speak, who has a chance to challenge, and who doesn't. And those are really, I think, core questions of kind of this integration process. So to start to try and answer those questions in this environment, I think first we need to think about Scotland's existing approach to integration and to displaced migration, and its capacity for governance over things like border control, housing provision, and language education. As I'm sure many of you are aware, within the UK, Scotland has quite a distinctive approach to migrant integration, and that includes integration for asylum seekers and refugees. So this is visible in a series of policy and political approaches, and that includes the Scottish Government's formal integration strategy, which is the New Scots strategy. And the existence of the strategy alone is in contrast to the approach of the UK government, which hasn't had a formal integration strategy since 2010. This strategy includes an acknowledgement that integration is a two-way rather than a one-way or an assimilationist process. And it also includes a commitment to integration from day one, which is a really important principle in Scotland, because it means that asylum seekers, for instance, can access language education from the moment that they arrive in Scotland, which again is a contrast to England, where asylum seekers have to wait until they're given leave to remain or get refugee status. So, of course, this divergence between Scotland and England and elsewhere in policy approaches, and this distinctive Scottish approach, is facilitated by devolution, which gives the Scottish Government scope to act differently within its devolved powers. So this is kind of a basic diagram that shows how these might kind of fall out. So this includes things like education, which the other speakers have mentioned a little bit, which enables the Scottish Government and asylum seekers and refugees in Scotland to access things like ESOL from day one. However, devolution also means that the Scottish Government is limited on the action that it can take regarding displaced migrants. As is quite well publicised, powers over immigration remain reserved to the UK Government, which not only means that the Scottish Government is unable to directly act upon things like immigration statuses, but it's also restricted in ways it can act on immigration kind of more broadly. The development of the UK Government's hostile environment policies, in which immigration controls have been extended into what other academics have called everyday bordering practices, makes this an additionally complex dynamic, as it means that reserved immigration policies do not simply have power over immigration statuses and determinations, but it also has power over things like asylum seekers' access to welfare support, public sector housing, even private sector housing access, labour market access, and so on. It's really quite extensive. The settlement also means that the scope of local government, so in Scotland, local authorities, to provide services and supports to displaced migrants is not only restricted, but is often really quite messy and complex. So as Nadin noted, this becomes even more complicated when we consider the implications of the devolved reserved settlement for different immigration statuses, not only between asylum seekers and refugees, so refugees, as we've heard, have slightly more rights than asylum seekers, but also between immigration pathways. So for instance, the dispersal pathway route and the resettlement route, which have kind of different outcomes and result in slightly different kind of privileges and rights. So in short, and without going into too much detail, what results is a really complex interplay of devolved and reserved competences, in which devolved and local governments' capacity to intervene on matters relating to displaced migration is both enabled and limited by the devolved settlement, and in which the ability of community, local or national actors to undertake their work and support displaced migrants often involves the negotiation of multi-scalar policies and politics. Now, I've put this diagram up on in the slides just to indicate the complexity of one area of integration. So this is a diagram that's kind of trying to indicate all the different funding streams and how community organisers might access funding for ESOL classes, and you can see it's labyrinthine, and that's just for one area. I'm not going to go into it in detail, but if anyone has questions, feel free and I'll try to answer them. So what I want to do now is kind of return to the question of the seminar, which is how can we build a welcoming and fair environment for asylum seekers and refugees in the current devolved environment? I kind of tweak the question there. So within the current devolved environment, one answer is to be cognizant of and act on the challenges and opportunities that devolution brings to supporting asylum seekers and refugees in Scotland. Another answer, of course, is to challenge the devolved settlement itself. Yet another answer is provided by moving focus away from this devolved infrastructure entirely and towards the potential of local action and community solidarity to act as a counterpoint to shortcomings in current structures and provisions. This is something that has a strong precedent and a really strong track record of success in Scotland, but again, it isn't without its difficulties. Central to the solution is meaningful and systemic opportunities for representation, participation, and policy contributions from and for asylum seekers and refugees and the organisations with which they are involved, something which stakeholders that we worked with reported is often missing in public and political environments in Scotland. A final answer comes in the form really of a warning against complacency within current policies and approaches in Scotland. In our research, stakeholders across sectors and locations broadly welcomed the new Scots integration strategy for kind of setting the tone and promoting a progressive approach to integration. Nevertheless, they also noted that this policy itself isn't without its shortcomings. For instance, whilst the Scottish Government provides resourcing for activities related to New Scots, the policy itself isn't resourced, which creates barriers to its implementation. In the meantime, New Scots policy itself arguably falls short on several areas, for instance, on gender inequality and displaced migration, on racism and displaced migration, and on the intersection between all of these things. So these are all factors which require further investigation and further consideration. So I think I'm probably near my 10 minutes, so I'm going to finish up there, but I hope that that gives you some kind of idea of the research and some of the kind of broader questions about fairness, welcome, and kind of the difficulties, challenges and opportunities related to integration and asylum seekers and refugees in Scotland. If anyone has any questions or comments, please either ask me now or you can get in touch with me later. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Emma. Yeah, I think all of the speakers have done an amazing job today. So thank you again for participating and joining us. And I think just to try to offer some kind of summary or some themes that I've just been listening from what I've heard so far, it just seems like the process and the refugee and asylum seeking process is so complex, you know, and it covers so much breadth throughout the whole of the UK, like in terms of, you know, it could be a different approach depending on, you know, how, like what organization you're going through, you know, there are different systems that are coming into play, and it encompasses so many parts of your life, whether that's education, whether that's health, whether that's, you know, being part of a community. And then also something that really struck me was the mentions about COVID and the additional complications that are coming through that, whether that's delays in already existing systems, or just, you know, kind of forcing partnerships, which is kind of like a better thing that's coming out of it, but an additional challenge when you have to work with people who you might not have before, and you have to find new ways to go about things, especially considering the environment. And then I think something that was also really great was just the emphasis on the necessity of having a two-way street to integration. You know, it's one thing to be able to, you know, become part of a new environment if you're coming from a different country or different setting, but you also have to have people here who are, you know, posing a welcoming environment. That doesn't just mean, you know, hey, come and adopt our practices and everything, but also, yeah, being able to understand and, you know, learn from each other. So yeah, now I'll just open it up for questions. I'm sure there'll be some, because it's such a great and fruitful topic. Okay, maybe there's some in the chat box. I think someone's mentioned. Brad asked a question to Robyn just about the SRC's volunteering opportunities, I guess, and also was wondering if you could use more volunteers for English teaching or conversational practice.
Yeah,
I guess that's a
quick, yeah. Brad, just privately.
Okay.
If anyone's interested in volunteering, we are closed at the moment for new volunteers, but if you want to send me your email privately, I can share your details with the volunteering team, and I'm sure they'll get back to you as soon as they can. I don't know what kind of opportunities are currently available, but it's good to have that link, so feel free to send me that privately in the chat if you'd like.
Great. Yeah, and you can feel free to put in the chat box, or you could, yeah, turn on your mics and be brave.
I'm mindful that I didn't actually offer an answer to your question. The other speakers have given great points of reflection, both in terms of an answer from an SRC perspective, but also in terms of reflection on my practice as a person engaging with the community. Shakya and Nadin both gave really truthful reflections on refugees and asylum seekers are people first. And I think that a lot of what we've spoken about the complex of systems and systems working against each other and coming in as a new person, not having full understanding of all of these systems, it's easy for that person to fall through and become another statistic. And I think that's really important, that we remember the humanity of each individual and the unique experiences. And that's a really important thing for practitioners and also policymakers to remember. So I think for me that's a big point of reflection that I'll be taking away today. So thanks to the other speakers for that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's, you know, wonderful just from creating this space. I think that we all can learn from each other, and, you know, whether that's, you know, firsthand experiences or just, yeah, forging those partnerships. And, you know, maybe this is something that we wouldn't have been able to do if we didn't have the virtual environment. So yeah, it's great. Does anyone have any kind of reflections or anything new that they maybe just learned today, like from the audience? Any thoughts? Yes.
It's Brad over here. I'm sorry, actually, I had to go in and out a little bit, so maybe I missed this, but I'm a grad student at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm wondering if there's an opportunity or space for more student engagement of refugees somehow, or if there's already existing some work like that, some organizations that it has students working on these refugee issues, or no? Does anyone know anything about that?
Would any of the speakers like to comment?
So I guess, so I'm based in Glasgow, although I work at Edinburgh, so my knowledge is kind of Glasgow centric, but I'll try and give an Edinburgh relevant answer as well. So STAR is a student organisation that does really good work supporting refugees. So if you, even if you Google them, Google STAR, they'll be able, like, they'll have social media and kind of online information that means that you'll be able to access and get involved. Okay. I guess within the university, there's a range of different activities that maybe aren't kind of directly related to asylum seekers and refugees, but are kind of really related to a lot of the issues that impact them. So the work of, or kind of any decolonizing work or anti-racist work would touch on issues of border control. And there's kind of a really active community talking about racial inequality and how to kind of analyze and combat that within sociology and SBS at Edinburgh. More broadly though, I think if you want to get involved in supporting asylum seekers and refugees, can maybe look outside the university as well. Like within Edinburgh, there's great organisations who are doing a whole range of work supporting refugees, largely refugees, but also some asylum seekers who live in Glasgow, in Edinburgh. And then in Scotland more broadly, there's loads of organisations in Glasgow and across the Central Belt that I think would always be looking for volunteers. I know that COVID makes things difficult, but it also kind of provides new ways of supporting people. So maybe online connections that wouldn't be available beforehand. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, that's a good starting point. I'm sort of helped found, and I'm the vice president of a student society for education and international development, and we're looking for something to do, something constructive that our whole organization could sort of focus on. And I personally am attracted to working on refugee issues. Sorry, go back. Sorry. And we have children. Zaya, let's just go to you. Zaya, let's just go to you. Sorry, everyone. But yeah, so I'm sort of looking, I was wondering if there's already like a well-organized, sort of well-oiled machine that brings in groups who want to help but don't know how yet. But it looks like maybe something that might need to be developed by us as well. So.
Yeah, so I know in Edinburgh there's a number of kind of community-based organisations that would certainly be open to conversations. So I think Colours Edinburgh do really good work, and I think it's called Welcoming Edinburgh. Do really great work with refugees. And then if you are kind of interested in the intersections of kind of gender and refugee support, organisations like Sahelia do amazing work. Could
you maybe type those into the chat for me?
I have it. I'll put them in the group chat.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.
I don't know, Robyn, would you have any others that you might be able to recommend in Edinburgh?
My knowledge of Edinburgh is limited. The first one that pops into my mind is something that I'm engaged with outside of my role at SRC. I volunteer for Europe Must Act. They're a very new grassroots organisation that started up this year in response to the COVID outbreaks in the refugee camps in Greece, on the islands, and they're campaigning for the decongestion of the refugee camps and more humane, fair immigration policy across the EU. That might be of interest. We have an Edinburgh specific chapter as well as Fife and, oh thanks Al, Fife and other local authority areas. So yeah, you could either reach out directly through them, or I could pass you the Edinburgh Leeds contact details. I was typing that in the chat, but there you go.
Thanks, everyone. Those were really helpful answers to my question. Thanks.
Ruby, do you have anything on Edinburgh by any chance?
I was just having a think. Sorry. I know that Star Edinburgh do things like Conversation Cafe. I'm not sure if it's been going on during lockdown, but I'm pretty sure they probably still run it virtually. And they are paired up with a local group, and I can't remember their name. I'll need to have a look through my stuff, but I know that, yeah, if you get in touch with the Star Edinburgh group anyway, they've got loads of resources and contacts within Edinburgh.
Ruby, do you know who the regional coordinator for Edinburgh is?
Our regional coordinator for Edinburgh just left. It was Fee, and I don't think they've hired anyone new yet. But when they do, we can circulate that information and the new person's email address, because they will have their fingers on all of the buttons.
A good way to find local organisations in your area is the New Scots Connect map on the Refugee Council website.
Oh yeah, on the forum.
Yeah.
The New Scots Connect forum. I can send a link actually right now. Hold on. That was a good shout. I totally forgot about that.
What would I do without you?
Okay, hold on.
It's great to, sorry, not to interrupt you. Go ahead. Oh, okay. No, I was just gonna say that I think it's great seeing all this chat about all different organizations that you could potentially get involved in. I think it's really useful to think about this kind of network that Edinburgh has, or even connections to Glasgow, especially like heading into the, if you're interested in doing the challenge in the spring, it would be great to kind of think about that, all these different networks, and maybe, how to connect them, because it seems like there's a lot of great groups doing a lot of useful work both at the university and beyond. So maybe that's something to think about. I think somebody in the chat had asked a question. Wendy, I believe, she was wondering, since the refugee integration is such a broad area, how broad should the projects we aim to develop with students as change agents be? How could we effectively create a specific project that could address a broad range of issues? I could give a background about like change agents perspective, and then maybe some of the speakers could talk specifically about what they might be thinking. I think in terms of change agents, we usually make these questions really broad as part of the challenge, so that you see how encompassing and kind of like, we call them like wicked problems. They're not easy to find one solution. There's many ways that you could go about them, and kind of that's the point of the program, is that through looking at the data sources, potentially like the New Scots strategy, something through that, listening, talking to different organizations, or seeing what SRC do, you could kind of focus on one or a couple aspects within your challenge. And so it'll kind of be really up to you to see what the information is telling you, or what your specific passions are, because clearly there's a lot of work to be done in various aspects of this challenge. So not really one answer for you, but hopefully it just kind of gives you a bit of excitement to potentially explore. I don't know if any of the speakers have any ideas or any thoughts about what they think would be most useful to focus on. We had a couple conversations today, I think, but if anyone wants to share. Okay, well, if no one has any initial thoughts or anything, we can just leave you on a cliffhanger in that sense, and kind of give you a chance to think about that heading into the future. Yeah, so kind of we'll just thank the speakers again, and if they have any final comments that they want to share before we sign off, they can do so at this point.
I don't have any further comments in the sense of kind of content contribution, but just to say thank you for inviting me. And if anybody has questions, either about the kind of practicalities of integration support and asylum seeking and refugee kind of support in Scotland, get in touch. My email was at the end of my presentation, but you can, like a quick Google on or search on the Edinburgh site, you should be able to find me, and I'd be happy to support you further.
Yeah, just same. Thanks for the invite. It's lovely to see people interested in learning about this. I feel like I entered the sector through my university course. I was a social work student and I did my placement at SRC, and I felt like immigration and issues of refugees and asylum seekers seemed like such huge issues that I couldn't hope to understand. And I felt so overwhelmed about it that it was a lot for me. So I find that people who aren't forced to learn about it typically don't. And that's why, especially with the way that the media engages with these subjects in the UK and the Western world in general, it's difficult to learn. So it's really encouraging to see so many people here open to learning and engaging and getting to grips with the subject a little bit more.